All right. Well, thank you for everyone's patience. We are connecting people from around the world tonight, or this afternoon for some of us, and so we appreciate your patience in helping us to be able to do that. Welcome to the 2020 Iowa City Book Festival. My name is John Kenyon. I'm the Executive Director of the Iowa City UNESCO City of Literature. This year, all of our events are online, and if you happen to miss anything that has already happened, you can catch up by visiting iowicitybookfestival.org for links to past events. I wanted to make sure everyone is aware that our festival is supported by the City of Iowa City, the University of Iowa, the Iowa Arts Council, and Iowa Public Radio. Now, our current situation has been challenging, whether you think of it in the macro sense or the micro sense of trying to put on a book festival in a pandemic. It has afforded new opportunities, and this event is one. When we learned that two former participants in the University of Iowa's International Writing Program had been longlisted for the National Book Award for Translated Literature, we began to brainstorm about a potential festival event. Soon we had both authors and their translators agreeing to join us from around the globe. They since have made the shortlist for the prize, so their books are among the 5 that are being considered for that award. I wanted to let you know that if you would like to ask a question during this event, you can click the Ask a Question button, or the words Ask a Question at the bottom of your screen, and you will be able to submit a question. And we will monitor those and hopefully have a chance to ask those during the program. In addition, if you click the green Buy a Book or Donate button, you will be taken to a separate page that gives you information about the books that are being discussed today and an ability to buy them from Prairie Lights Books, which is our book-selling partner for the festival, as well as information about how to donate to the City of Literature to allow us to continue to put on free programming such as this. So now I would like to invite to the screen Aron Aji, who is the head of the MFA in Literary Translation at the University of Iowa and a board member of the City of Literature organization, who will moderate today's program. All right, you're on. And I believe you are muted.
Yes. Your microphone is muted.
Hello. Can you hear me? I hope you can, all of you. Very nice. Sorry about the technical difficulties. I suppose the world has grown smaller, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we are always connected, which may very well be a good thing. But here we are incredibly excited to connect 4 individuals in our Iowa City Book Festival. And indeed, as John has mentioned, they hail from different parts of the world, and this is an incredible opportunity for us. Because of the technical difficulties, what we're going to do is we're going to receive our guests in pairs rather than, as a group of 4. And then hopefully we will be able to bring them all together at the last part of our conversation. Our conversation will begin with Anya Kaufman. As John mentioned, Anya was indeed a participant of our international writing program fall residency in 2010. And she is joining us from Germany now. And Anne Posten, who is her translator, she also is joining us from Germany. We're delighted to have both of them there. And so what I thought we should do first is ask Anya to tell us about the journey of this book, how this book came to be, what brought her to write about it, and just tell us a little bit about the genesis and development of this marvelous project called High as the Waters Rise. Anya?
Yes. First of all, thank you very much for having us, or for the invitation. And it's wonderful to speak about the book with the Iowa Book Festival, because it somehow started Iowa because I think the first man I talked to about rig works and the oil business was a fellow student in Iowa who had been in the fracking business in Holland and Romania. So when I came there, I already had the idea, and the story sort of evolved from a short story I wrote some years ago. And I was so fascinated by this character and by this world, which is like so invisible to us. And at the same time, we all depend on it. And the book tells the story of Václav, a 52-year-old worker from Holland, from Germany with Polish roots, whose parents have been working in the coal mining industry, which was important to me because I have also some roots there. And I think in general, I have a fascination for this mining industry and how it changed, and how not only the technology but also the need for coal, oil somehow changed, but also for the world out there and for the needs of the workers who by now sort of travel everywhere, work everywhere, whereas they don't really have a close circle of family or people they know around them. And I was wondering what that really does to people, because it's a phenomenon which is not only for rig workers. And this Václav, the main character of the book, was somehow fascinating for me, because I was wondering how someone who's rather sensitive gets along out there, what dreams and hopes someone would have to go out there, and what comes out if you stay out there for a long time. So in the beginning, there were a lot of questions. And then came a lot of research, a lot of traveling, a lot of interviews, a lot of material that workers from all over the world sent me, journeys I did. It was a long project, but in the end, it all came into this book.
It is an amazing, journey around so many different countries and so many. I mean, you're connecting so many threads here. How did you decide to broaden it this widely and?
Widely in the sense that there are so many places.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I was wondering really what this life looks like, and I felt the need to have a lot of places, also to show that they have a lot of places they know, they have a lot of people they know in these places, but then what do they really know about these different places? And also I think some of these places, at least in Morocco and in Malta, they would be something exotic and beautiful from a certain angle, but for a worker who's really worn down and also sad, it feels very differently. And so I really wanted to break also with this exotic picture you'd have of these different places.
I mean, I also think that we talk a lot about displaced people, as part of the global economy and the global migration patterns. But this displacement almost also breaks the identity of one person into several pieces, and some of these pieces remain very deeply connected with the places they have left. Mm-hmm. And other parts are just sort of almost forcefully molded into what the global economy wants of us. It's very interesting. Very, very interesting. Well, thank you so much. This is really, an incredibly ambitious project, and congratulations again. I'm going to now bring in Anne into the conversation, and what we thought we would do is we want to obviously highlight the beauty of the language and the beauty of this work. So we're going to first ask Anja to read brief passage in German, since this book was written in German, and I think we owe it to that Anne then was able to execute her brilliant translation with that incredibly important and wonderful German text. So Anja will read a little bit in German, and then Anne will read from the translation. And then what we will do is we will have the author and the translator talk about the journey of the translation and how it came to be and all of that good stuff. Well, here you go, Anja.
All right. So we start in a stormy night abroad the coast of Morocco, far away from the coast of Morocco. And Václav, the main character, is back in his room after the work ended because of the storm, and he's looking for Matthias, his bunkmate and friend, and he fell asleep because he was so exhausted and wakes up again. Musste etwas geträumt haben. Beim Schrillen des Alarms erinnerte nicht mehr als Fetzen, Bäume in einer Landschaft, ein paar Hügel. Es war der Wecker von Matthias, dem noch ein paar Minuten zum Beginn seiner Schicht blieben. Das Licht war noch eingeschaltet, die Luft stickig und feucht. Er hatte vergessen, die Tür zum Bad zu schließen. Matthias war nicht da. Wind drückte gegen die Kabinenwand, auf dem Gang war es ruhig. Sie würden die Arbeit noch ein paar Stunden aussetzen lassen. Er drehte sich auf die Seite und starrte die Sachen an. Alles lag unverändert, auch sein Bündel mit dem Speckstein, das er stets bei sich trug. Es lag, wo es immer lag. Václav zog die Decke enger um sich und meinte, die Augen nur kurz geschlossen zu haben, als etwas ihn hochschrecken ließ. Dumpf, sehr fern, nicht das Poltern der Schritte auf dem Gang, etwas anderes als das durchklingende Signal, das die Arbeit fortsetzen sollte. Die Unruhe war unerwartet und stark. Sie schien von der hellen Wand zu rühren, wo das plötzliche Tageslicht eine klare Linie zeichnete. Auch sein warmes Vlies hing noch im Schrank.
Thank you.
I'll read the same section, but continuing on a little bit. He must have dreamed. When the alarm shrilled, he remembered only shreds, trees and a landscape, some hills. It was Matthias' alarm, only a few minutes left before his shift. The light was still on, the air stuffy and damp. He'd forgotten to close the bathroom door. Matthias wasn't there. Wind pressed against the cabin wall. It was quiet in the hallway. They'd keep work suspended for a few more hours. He turned on his side and stared at their things. All was unchanged. Even his pack with the soapstone that he always carried. It lay where it always lay. Václav pulled the blanket tighter and thought he had just closed his eyes when something startled him awake, dull and distant. Not the clatter of steps on the walkway, something other than the piercing signal for work to continue. The unease was unexpected and strong. It seemed to emanate from the bright wall, where the sudden daylight traced a clear line. Matthias' warm fleece still hung in the closet. So he brought him the sweater. The morning was clear. Heavy clouds moved across the early blue as if in a hurry. In the distance, a silvery shimmer still lingered. He carried the fleece for Matthias, and he carried it like a plea, while the running of the machine suddenly struck him as unreal. Here we are, Petrov said as he came around the light blue tank behind which they extracted the drill cuttings. He saw the familiar pans with the sludge, the stones and muddy earth, saw all the things that were familiar to him, the shaker screens, the monitors and hoses, saw Petrov with his good-natured smile, but he did not see Matthias. Where's your from this morning? Petrov took off his safety goggles and looked at Václav in the same way Václav was looking at him. Petrov had wanted to wait until Matthias came by himself. Work had gotten off to a slow start after that night. Václav didn't have to remind him of the darkness of the sea. They looked. It only occurred to him later, after they had searched every room, the whole deck, every corner and step all the way down to the boat landings, the gym, the mess hall several times and several times their own cabins, after announcements were made, after the drilling foreman subjected the workers to a standardized round of questioning. The sky broke into a radiant noon, while nothing of the day and none of the seabirds that flew over the water could possibly be real. Radio messages went out. Someone brought him a hot drink and he scanned every jacket leg with his eyes, the water's surface with its crazy shimmer. After they tried to drag him in and finally left him to sit between the tanks, and an even round sun sank into the water, only then did he notice that his fist was closed around something, which only then, in the evening and before the flat horizon, turned into something that had once been Matthias's fleece. On this evening the moon seemed scarce, hovering as it did above the swaying sea. In his bed Václav still wore his boots. A few feathers escaped from the pillow. Some huge being had ripped everything away, everything that had been only yesterday. He stood in the cabin and regretted winding up Matthias' headphones. He thought about it, about the fact that he'd picked them up and he couldn't hold any of it off. But it was now evening and the storm was over and it had grown dark as it always did. He heard steps outside. The men ambled into the mess hall in their sweaty t-shirts. They were hungry, the food smelled. He couldn't stay in the cabin. He went out. The sea was almost calm. Now and then they sent someone to come and check on him. At some point Petrov came and offered him cigarettes, and Václav watched as he sat next to him, wordlessly smoking. "They could cost you your job," Václav said, and Petrov laughed softly, took one more drag, and looked straight out at the sea. "They'll be asking you too," he said. "They're not going to send anyone out to look for him, are they?" "No," Petrov said. "They most certainly won't." They were silent a while. Gas was still being flared. A seagull flew past the footlight. Sometimes they came over from the tankers. "What will you do now?" Petrov asked. "Where will you go?" They looked down at the water as it grew dim and a light sheen rode the swells. "Back," Václav said. "Where is that?" He thought he saw a smile in Petrov's eyes. "What about you?" Václav asked finally. "Wife and kids," Petrov said. "Fucking hell, they think it's good money out here. That's what they all think." The last light came from far away and fell on the gray stubble of his chin. Drops fell, echoing behind them on the empty tank. The wind picked up, rubbing against the bars and cables. Petrov put up his hood. "I can't let you stay out here, Vincent. Come on in." He put his arm around Václav. It was an arm that knew that the next days too would taste of rain and clouds, and of their passing. He couldn't stand to be in the cabin. He said Dobrá noc to Petrov and went to the mess hall. Fat Lukács stood behind the counter, and he wrung his chef's hat between his hands when he saw Václav, as if he saw a shadow beside him. And he heard how they lowered their voices. Mikhail and Ray and Steve. Someone pushed back a chair. "Denzel, do you want to join us?" "Thanks, but I won't stay." But then he sat anyway, a long line, with an instant lemon tea, lukewarm in its paper cup. Enough silence to make their forearms stick to the tabletop. "Have you guys seen these t-shirts?" Bright red and green, Ray was wearing a washed-out sweatshirt with a manga print, a princess and a sword. A few feet separated his table from theirs. He noticed how they looked at him, how their eyes wandered surreptitiously over, as if it were his fault that no one was getting out the cards and they couldn't yell across the room to Lukács, who absently wiped at the glass, as if he'd only just noticed the film of grease on the divider before the shimmering meatballs. Václav wasn't sure it was the same room. He told Lukács to fry him up a couple of eggs. and ate them with some cold potatoes. Suddenly he was hungry. He was careful not to scratch the plate with his fork. It was no longer their mess hall, but it was the same room. At some point, a new decade had begun, and they'd sat here and played, with all the strength of extinguished firecrackers. Matthias, young enough, lively. Never before had Václav. Never had he loved the sudden distance that surrounded them more.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you so much. And let me ask this question to get us started. How did you come to this book? Or how this book came to you?
I should say it's actually because of Iowa, because Anya and I met over 10 years ago, just after she had left Iowa, sort of by when she spent some time on my floor in New York. And we've been friends, and I've translated her work since then. So it wasn't just this work that got me involved with her. So I've been translating her poetry and very much look forward to reading the book, and was happy to see, actually was sort of astonished to see that somehow Anya's poetry was in this book, and also it was a novel, as if she had been writing novels all her life, was how it seemed to me. It was a sort of astonishing thing to read. And I wanted to translate it and was lucky enough to find a willing publisher.
That's wonderful. And so this is, as a poet, working on this language with so much love and care. How did you enter into the translation process? How did it work for you guys? Did you work together, or did you just tell Anya, just leave me alone until I'm done?
I did have, I think, a full draft before I started asking her any questions. So in terms of the poetry, I was, I think, happy to find my way into the voice on my own, which took some doing. But as I said, I already knew Anya's work. So in some sense, I felt like I knew when I was getting it right, when it sounded like I know Anya's work should sound. And then after that, there were hours and hours on Skype asking a lot of technical questions, but also some sort of, those who have read the book will know that there's a lot of poetic elusiveness. There are sometimes images or sentences that come in and you think, okay, I know all of these words, but am I understanding that right? Why is this happening now? So there was a lot of us talking about that, a lot of sending pictures of complicated machinery back and forth.
I bet. Yeah, I mean that's always very, very challenging. You know, it's not appreciated sufficiently that for a translator to really do this correctly, you actually have to do a lot of research into you know, the environment and the instrumentation of the novel. And yeah, what was, you know, some recollections from the translation process that you can share with us?
Yeah, I very much trusted in Anne because I knew she sent me her first 20 pages early on, and they seemed to just feel right, and she somehow caught the rhythm and the tone of the novel, and so I really didn't want to interrupt when it was not necessary. But then I was also not worried, but I knew how much research I had done and how many little technical issues were in there, and so I was. For me, it was sometimes more like translating technical terms which only exist in English into some German, which should also feel, of course, like a normal German phrase, but all the Rick life is in English, of course. So for me, it was more the opposite way around, that the first 5 people I was talking to, of course, talked to me in English about their Rick life. And then I was really happy to, in the end, to find someone who spoke German, who could also tell me a bit about this world. So I had to do some kind of translation and get it into the German into some German, and but then for Anne, of course, it was the other way around. And sometimes it's not. I mean, I don't have a lot of technical stuff in the book, but to get it right, you really need to see, you at least need to know what these things look like, feel. So we were talking a bit about that, but then the questions were really about technical stuff mainly, and then about the Ruhrgebiet, which also had some local idioms, which are also for German sort of unusual. I think that's also difficult to translate, but I think I didn't need to help that much, although we had quite a bit of conversations about that.
And what is your recollection? You just sort of looked when she said, "I didn't think I helped as much." And you said,
well, and I'm glad you brought up the beat, because I think that was something that is so specific. Even in German, it requires either knowledge or acceptance that you don't know what. Either you know what a Vierspanner is, either you know what the house looks like, and you are seeing it, or you know that it's something from that part of the world. So I needed that introduction from Anya to understand what it was that I was supposed to be seeing and supposed to be making other people see, or accepting that it was just some German they didn't know.
So can you say a little bit more, Anne, about the poetic dimension of this work that drew you in? And because I suspect with all of these human characters and human lives that are being woven into this narrative, there's a lot that gets conveyed through the tone of the language more than through the words.
I think I'm glad we read this section, actually, because I think it shows a lot of the book's qualities, a lot of both of its poetic qualities and the technical things. That section sort of had everything. And there was, for example, that one long block of text, which was in fact one sentence. Which I think, I mean, I don't know, Anya maybe would disagree, but I think the technique in that paragraph is fairly poetic even in German. I mean, it's not a strict sentence, it's a pose poem sort of sentence, and it's all about the rhythm. This happens, and there was this, and they looked at this, and they looked at this, and then another kind of phrase comes in, and then we come back to the original framing device, and then it was the sweater. And that rhythm, especially because we're on, at that point, an oil platform in the sea, is really part of what creates that atmosphere. And then once we're not on the sea anymore, it's still sort of the rhythm of Matthias's emotions and his grief in a way. And I think I recognize that rhythm, and trying to replicate it in English, that I think is an example of where I just did the whole thing. I just did the whole one sentence. That doesn't always work.
Oh, but what a joy it is when it does.
Oh, yeah.
No? Oh, my God. Yeah, I mean, I always say, no, before you put that semicolon, wrestle that sentence. Yes.
As Anya mentioned, I had done these 20 pages before we had a publisher. When I did those 20 pages, I thought, oh, this book can be good. It can be good in English.
Right. And so you had a sense that this book would go places from that.
It's going to be on the shortlist for the National Book Award. I just knew.
I mean, it's just gorgeous, isn't it? It's so beautiful to have that intuition from the get-go that drives us to these books, and then that drives us through the process. That's so beautiful. I'm going to ask John who we have in the green room, and if we can connect with the others. But my hope is that we will all get together at the end. If not, maybe we will do again pair by pair. But thank you so much for your part, and hope to see you again.
All right. Well, hopefully you can hear me, disembodied voice. We'll bring our other two folks in, and then we'll send Anya and Anne to the audience, and we'll move on.
There is. It's very nice.
Hello, Aaron. Can you see me?
Yes, I can.
Oh, fantastic.
That's fantastic. Fantastic. We are waiting for Lisa Dillman. We are delighted to have yet another international writing program full resident from 2011, I believe, Pilar Quintana from Colombia, with this wonderful honor of the National Book Award finalist for her novel, The Bitch, in the English, in its English title. And we are, while we are waiting for Lisa to join us, and I think she will, she was here right before the program. So we're hoping.
She's connecting here.
Yeah. So what I will ask is the same to you, Pilar, if you could perhaps tell us about the journey of this book, how it came to be, why you decided to write it, and how you went through the whole process in producing this book that now has received the final, has been chosen as the finalist for National Book Award.
Well, first, thank you, Aaron, for having me here. I'm very happy to be kind of in Iowa City. I would love to go back. I've been like in this situation. I've been missing my time in Iowa City, my time of being lonely and being able to write with a house not so full of people. Yeah. So this book, La Perra, The Bitch, is set in Colombia's Pacific coast, which is an area very isolated from the rest of Colombia. Many Colombians do not know this area of Colombia. Yeah, they only have read about it in the news. And I lived there for 9 years. Yeah, and when I came back to live in the city, I think I was missing the jungle, the beach, the rain. This area is one of the rainiest places on earth. And I was in Bogota, living in a city which is very high up in the mountains. It's cold weather all year round. So I was missing it. And I had been writing about the jungle since I left the jungle. And this was a short story. I thought this was a short story about a woman who, her dream was to have a baby, and she had been trying for many years, and she was nearing 40 years old, and she realized she wasn't gonna get pregnant and decided to adopt a puppy. Yeah, and I started writing it when I was pregnant with my first child. I was 42 years old. I was all my life, since I was 15, I didn't want to have kids. And I was sure of that. But when I divorced my first husband, I started thinking, but what if I have a baby? And it just came like a wish, like a very powerful wish. And I got a boyfriend. We decided to have a baby. And I started writing, I think Lisa's coming. No, she went away. Okay, she will come. I have faith. So my baby was 9 months old, and I was creating the story when I was pregnant. I was thinking how I'm going to do this story. But then when I started writing, he was 9 months old, and he kept me busy all day long, and I had only 2 hours a day to write, and that was when I was lactating, and when he was feeding from me, I had 2 hours to write.
Uh-huh.
And he was a big baby now, so I couldn't put it in in like a baby carrier, but I had to lay down with him, and the only way I could write was in my phone. So I started writing what I thought was a short story. And oh, hello, Lisa, you're here finally.
Hi.
Good.
You were able to do it, and me too. I thought we were not gonna able to do it, but here we are.
Oh, I think we did. Thank you so much, John. So thank you for the story of this, the journey of this book and how it came to be. And you said that you thought that it would be a short story, but it just turned out to be a novel. And what we would like to do now is what we did with our other author translator pair. If you don't mind, we would love for you to read a little bit from the Spanish, from the original, and then we will ask Lisa to take us through the English translation of maybe a longer passage. And then we will have a conversation between the two of you, I hope.
Okay. So I start reading now?
Yeah, please.
Okay. Cuando la marea estaba baja, la playa se volvía inmensa. Un descampado de arena negra que más parecía barro. Cuando estaba alta, el agua la tapaba toda, y las olas traían palos, ramas, semillas y hojas muertas de la selva, y los revolvían con la basura de la gente. Damaris venía de visitar a su tía en el otro pueblo, que quedaba arriba en tierra firme, pasando el aeropuerto militar, y era más moderno, con hoteles y restaurantes de concreto. Había parado en la casa de doña Elodia por curiosidad, al verla con los perritos, y ahora iba para su casa en la punta opuesta de la playa. Como no tenía dónde meter a la perra, se la puso contra el pecho. Le cabía en las manos, olía a leche y le hacía sentir unas ganas muy grandes de abrazarla fuerte y llorar. El pueblo de Damaris era una calle larga de arena apretada con casas al lado y lado. Todas las casas estaban destartaladas y se elevaban del suelo sobre estacas de madera, con paredes de tabla y techos negros de moho. Damaris tenía un poco de temor de la reacción de Rogelio cuando viera a la perra. A él no le gustaban los perros, y si los criaba era solamente para que ladraran y cuidaran la propiedad. Ahora tenía 3, Danger, Mosco y Olivo.
Hello, Lisa.
Hi.
Thank you so much. Lisa Dillman is coming to us from Georgia, right?
Yes.
You are in Georgia right now at Emory. You are also suffering through the virtual education, I suspect. But so now it is your turn to please read your passage, and then we will have a conversation.
Okay, great. So I'm going to read the same passage that Pilar read, but I'll go to the end of the chapter. So this is when Damaris, the main character, has just gotten the puppy for the first time. When tide was out, the beach was massive, a vast expanse of black sand that looked more like mud. When it was in, the water covered the beach completely, and the waves brought in twigs, branches, seeds, and dead weeds from the jungle, and then churned them all up with people's trash. Damaris was on her way back from visiting her aunt in the next town, which was higher up, on solid ground, and out past the military airport. It was also more modern, with cinder block hotels and restaurants. She stopped at Doña Elodia's out of curiosity after seeing her with the puppies, and was now going back to her own place at the opposite end of the beach. With nowhere to put the puppy, she carried her against her bosom. The tiny dog fit in her hands, smelled of milk, and made Damaris long desperately to hold her tight and cry. Damaris' town was one long packed sand road with houses on either side. All of the houses were run down, raised up on stilts, and had wood plank walls and roofs black with mold. Damaris was a little afraid of how Rogelio would react when he saw the dog. He didn't like dogs and only kept them so they'd bark and protect the property. At this point, he had 3, Danger, Mosco, and Olivo. Danger, the oldest, Looked like one of those labs the soldiers use for sniffing boats and tourist suitcases, except his head was big and square, like the pit bulls at Hotel Pacifico Real in the next town along. His mother had belonged to the late Josue, a man who had actually liked dogs. Josue also kept them so they'd bark, but he showed them affection too and trained them to go hunting with him. According to Rogelio, one day while he was visiting the late Josue, a puppy not 2 months old broke away from the litter and started barking at him. That, he decided, was the dog for him. The late Josue gave him the dog, and Rogelio named him Danger in English. Danger grew up to fulfill the promise of his name, becoming a ferocious and possessive animal. When Rogelio talked about him, he seemed to feel respect and admiration, but he never treated him well and was always scaring him, shouting, "Yeah!" and raising a hand so the dog would remember all the times Rogelio had hit him. You could tell Mosco had had a hard life as a puppy. He was all small and scrawny and trembly. One day he showed up on the property, and since Danger accepted him, he stayed. He had a wound on his tail, and a few days later it got infected. By the time Damaris and Rogelio took any notice of it, the wound was full of maggots, and Damaris thought she saw a mosca, a fully formed fly, flutter out. "Did you see that?" she cried. Rogelio hadn't seen anything, and when Damaris told him, he laughed out loud and said they'd finally found a name for the beast. "Sit still, Mosco, you son of a bitch," he ordered. He grabbed the end of the dog's tail, raised his machete, and before Damaris realized what he was doing, lopped it off in one go. Mosco took off howling, and Damaris stared at Rogelio in horror. The maggot-ridden tail still in his hand, Rogelio shrugged his shoulders and said he'd only done it to put a stop to the infection. But Damaris always thought he'd enjoyed it. The youngest dog, Olivo, was the son of Danger and the chocolate lab next door, which the neighbors claimed was purebred. He looked like his father, though his fur was longer and grayer. Olivo was the least friendly of the three. None of them went near Rogelio, and they were all wary around people. But Olivo wouldn't even approach anybody and was so distrustful that he wouldn't eat if there were people in sight. Damaris knew that it was because Rogelio, when they were eating, would sometimes creep up to them before they realized and whip them with a thin guadua reed that he kept specifically for this purpose. Sometimes he did it if they'd done something wrong, and sometimes just because, just for the pleasure of beating them. Plus, Olivo couldn't be trusted. He bit before barking and from behind. Damaris told herself things would be different with this dog. This one was hers, and she wouldn't let Rogelio do any of those things, wouldn't even let him give the dog dirty looks. She'd made it to Don Jaime's shop and showed him the puppy. "What a tiny little thing," he said. Don Jaime's shop had only one counter and one wall, but it was so well stocked you could find anything from food to nails and screws there. Don Jaime was from upcountry, had moved to town with nothing back when they were building the naval base, and gotten together with a local, a black woman even poorer than him. There were people who said he'd prospered because of his witchcraft, but Damaris thought it was because he was a good man, hardworking too. That day, he gave her a week's vegetables, bread for the next day's breakfast, and a bag of powdered milk and a syringe to feed the puppy, all on credit. He even let her have a cardboard box.
You know, this is a very tense book. I listened almost on the edge of my seat. The language is so charged. Lisa, do you want to tell us how this book came to you, or you came to it? How did it all begin?
I would love to, yes. It began, quite honestly, because I found myself quite affected by the Me Too movement, and it made me do a lot of soul searching and reckoning, and I was aware of the fact that almost every book I had translated was written by a man. And for quite some time, I had been wanting to find a woman writer that I really wanted to translate. And so I began asking friends and quite frankly, most of the writers who I translate, I began asking them, who should, women, who should I read? Who should I read? And another writer who I translate, Yuri Herrera, said, I mean, everyone I asked gave me a list of people, but Judy gave me several people, and I read everybody that everyone suggested, and this book just really, really hit me. And I had by chance also read an earlier novel of Pilar's called Cosquillas en la Lengua, and I had loved that. It's a very, very different book. But when I read this, I was like, this is it. And so I, in a very kind of 21st century way, I did the passive aggressive thing, which was to immediately follow her on Twitter. And then she actually followed me back, which I was thrilled about, because then it meant that I could send her a private message. So I sent her a message and said, I absolutely love your book. I really, really want to translate this book. And rather than say, who the hell do you think you are? She actually replied to me, and I was over the moon. And she replied and said that right at that moment, they were gestionando.
I can't help you with that.
the rights were being bought. So the rights were being bought. And so it was fortuitous on many, many levels for me.
That is wonderful. And Pilar, what are some of the things you remember through this translation process? Did you interact with each other? Did you communicate a lot? Has this also made you become friends, maybe?
Yes, it has. And more than that, when she wrote to me in Twitter, I'm like, I can't believe she's writing to me. I can't believe she's interested in my books, because she was Judy Herrera's translator, and Judy is one of my favorite writers. He's a friend, a close friend, but I love his literature. I really love it. And if Lisa was translating his literature, it's because she was good. Yeah. So I was so honored and so happy, and all came to a good end. And here we are. Yeah, and Lisa is so thorough as a translator. She came to Colombia because she wanted to hear the sound of the voices. Yeah, she wanted to hear that, and I think that was wonderful. And her questions were so amazing that they made me even realize things I didn't know about my book and about Spanish language, like, I don't know, words like kiosco that I thought, but everybody knows what it's a kiosco. No, that it's a Colombian word. A kiosco, we use it in Spanish language all over, but the way we use it in Colombia, it's different than we use it, than they use it as well elsewhere. And she made me realize all those things like that, yeah? The use of some words. And also she made me think, in the beach in La Perra, there's racial issues, yeah? And also, how do you say clasista?
Classist.
Classist, both of them. And she made me as well realize when there was what in Colombia, racism and classism, they're intertwined. And she made me realize that there was a difference in those two concepts. Yeah. So I think for me as a writer, it was like studying almost like I did it. I don't know, an MFA with Lisa through seeing her work.
Oh, great. Very, very nice. Very nice. You know, I'm asking these questions also because, you know, these are our opportunities to encourage our listeners and readers to think about, you know, what actually translation entails. I'm working on an essay for a collection, and the part of the title of the essay is "What Beside the Words." You know, everybody thinks that translation is about the words, but really there is so much more that, in fact, you know, the words are the easiest to translate in some ways. It's everything else. Lisa, do you want to talk a little bit about the tone, it's an emotionally very charged work, and how you inhabited that, you know, in your translation?
Yeah, I would love to. For me, one of the big challenges and pleasures of translating this book was the fact that the way I read it, I don't know if Pilar would agree, but the way that I read it, there's a kind of symmetry, and it's almost like a symmetry of a cruel symmetry between the human world and the natural world and the canine world, right? Because there's sort of all potentially tragic in this work, but nature, particularly, you know, the Colombian Pacific coast, the jungle, the sea, nature is I would say a protagonist in the work. And because that sort of thing is so localized, there were so many things, whether it be a very specific type of boat, fishing boat, or multiple different types of what in English we might just call something like wicker, right? But, you know, Pilar would, you know, so I went to Colombia and Pilar showed me lots of photos, and, you know, this is the kind of weaving that you use to make this kind of basket, but this is the other kind of palm frond that you use to make this kind of bag, etc. And so that was, I mean, one of the challenges, it was just the understatedness of that. And I have to say, I think we also really lucked out in terms of, or I feel like I really lucked out in terms of editors, because the editor for this book is, I mean, the woman who copy edited at World Editions is a poet herself. Her name is Lydia Unsworth, and it was really great that she was, I didn't have to fight her at all for things that I wanted to do. Like, I want to include in Spanish a lot of things here, and that's always a fight. And it wasn't with her. She was very open to it, so it was that was a pleasure. But the combination of the sort of the understatedness of how localized things are in the natural world, and how matter of fact tragedy is, with what happens with the storms and people dying, and how matter of fact, as Pilar mentioned, the systemic injustices that are just part of life in the novel. There's no meta commentary on it. It's just there. So capturing that, I feel like, is it's hard to remain very subtle and understated about it.
So Pilar, I'm going to ask you to go back to the your genesis story, which is you had a newborn and you were feeding your newborn while writing on the cell phone, you said, on the phone.
Yes.
How did you go in and out of these two worlds? I mean, this is it's an amazing feat to just even imagine, you know, the tone, the emotion of this book, and the emotion of, you know, your life at that time.
Yeah, even though those 2 hours I had a baby in my book, yeah, he was there, but those 2 hours I was away, yeah, and I was getting myself back, because after having a baby, I felt that I wasn't me anymore, but I was just a mother and a provider of food and of care and of love, yeah. But going back to writing, I'm writing La Perra made me understand I still was a person, and I was not only just a mother, but I was still a writer. Yeah, and it was fantastic to finish. I wrote it all on my in my phone, and I didn't know how many pages I had. And when I put it in Word and in double space with the fuente I use, I realized, oh, I have a short novel here. Yeah, so I was so happy, and my agent was also very happy that it wasn't a short story, but a novel, a novella.
Very nice. And throughout the translation process, did you have occasion to have conversations besides just sort of the more cultural specific things? I mean, I'm just wondering, because, you know, one of the things that people would find it interesting is that when we are translating a book, we're really trying to inhabit a space that is not ours. And in fact, at the same time, we're also intruding in that space. This, you know, this book wasn't written for Lisa to translate, right? And yet you also inhabit that space. And then you also interact with the author in that space, which is her space, and now you are in it. Do you have any comments on this? And you can just say that this is all a rambling and you can leave it alone.
Well, for me, I would say, I mean, yes, we did have contact. I always like to be in contact with writers that I'm translating if they are willing. Mm-hmm. And Pilar was always very generous and incredibly receptive to my questions. And I think over the course of, over the course of multiple emails, little bits of your lives enter into things, right? It's not just here's today's 5 questions for you. No, it's so I did feel like I got to know her better over the course of this, and then of course going to Bogota was wonderful to get to meet in person and go have ajiaco and but I will also say that I did not ask personal questions about the book. I did not ask questions about how was your, I mean, I knew that Pilar had lived on the coast, and I knew that she had lived in a house that was very much like one of the houses in the book. Mm-hmm. But I never asked anything personal about her life in the book.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's good. That's a good restraint. That's wonderful. So we have a question, and then after this question, I'm going to see if John can bring our other guests in, or we will see how it all goes. But there is a question, and on some of its pages, your publisher advertises the book as The Bitch, clearly worried about the non-canine sense of the word. Was this an issue discussed in the publication process?
Yes. Yes.
Yes. And can you share a little bit?
So in Spanish, it's called la perra. Yeah, and la perra, it's a dirty word, but still people say, here is my perra or my perrita. We use it to name our dogs. Our female dogs are called perras still, but in English, no. And well, you tell them from here on.
Yes, it was, I mean, from the start, it was something that I was incredibly cognizant of. And we did, and I had many days and nights and weeks of pondering and insomnia and impromptu focus groups with everyone I could find. And one of the things that helped me was to hear Pilar say that readers had been in Spanish kind of taken aback by the title in Spanish and made assumptions about what the book might actually be about. And so, you know, I did think of, I don't know, 15 or 20 alternate titles. The pup, the puppy, the dog, doggy, it's little dog, etc., etc. And in the end, feel okay about The Bitch because the English edition very clearly has a picture of a dog, right? Mm-hmm. Had it had a picture of the protagonist, that would have been a completely different issue.
Terrible.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes, I mean, that's a very good question, because there are indeed, you know, in fact, the two stories, La Perra that is, in fact, on the one hand, a very innocent reference to the dog can be used as a as an as a swear word or an insult. And so it's almost like a reverse symmetry, right? In English, the bitch has sort of become so much more associated with its connotation that in fact, it's the denotation that gets lost there, whereas in the Spanish, you have to bring the connotation in. So this is really wonderful, wonderful. Well, we have.
Can I say, like with the other translators to other languages, they tell me, but in our language, the word bitch or the word perra, it's an insult, and I'm like, in Spanish too. You don't worry. Yeah, I know that.
Yes,
so, Aron, I was going to jump in. I think if I could make you a disembodied voice, we might be able to have our 4 guests on. So I'm going to try that.
It's been a dream of mine. This is what a translator is, a disembodied voice.
Let's see. Anya was trying to connect here and see if maybe we could get her to come up, but maybe that's not going to work, and I'll allow you to be seen again.
No, you don't have to. That's okay. While we're waiting for this, if I may ask those of you who are participating in this event, if you have questions, could you please type them, and then we will try to ask them to our guests. This has been a fantastic exchange, albeit a little divided rather than all unified, but I think we made it through. But if you have any questions from the participants, please type them for us. Somebody said that the translator has disembodied voice. That might be a good theme for somebody else to write about, they say. But of course, there is a tension here, right? I mean, the presence of the translator usually is not welcome, right? And yet the translators are so fundamental in this process. I mean, maybe I don't know. I mean, I'd like to ask Anja and Pilar, what do you think about your books coming out in English? What does that mean? Because for some authors, this is a distraction. For other authors, this is a very welcome outreach. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, I just love, I think the translators rewrite. They write a new book. Yeah, I do think that. And I read my book by Lisa Dillman, and I'm like, oh, this book's so good. I like it better in English. Yeah, I really like it. I read it, and I'm like, this book I really would like to read. That's the kind of book I like. It's like seeing my book through new eyes, different from mine. And it's wonderful.
Very nice. Anja, what is your thought on this?
It's totally exciting. Also, because I think in the writing process you are so far in your own head, and then suddenly you see that somebody even can transform it into another language, and people can read it and understand it and see it with different eyes. And also, I was super happy, and I have a great respect for the work of the translator, because I also think it's like it's not like rewriting it, but to really give it a voice and also find solutions for difficult situations, and recreate the rhythm, and it's really great. I'm super happy about it.
In fact, one of our most sympathetic readers of our work as translators is often the author. You can imagine, in fact, what the translator ought to have gone through to come up with the work in the other language. Both of you are very, very, positive and complimentary about the process, as well as your translators. We have a question for Anne Posten. Anne, do you hear us?
Yeah, I do.
Okay. So the question is, since you had already translated some of Anya's poetry, did that, in what ways did it enter your translation of the prose?
I think part of the question is, in what way did Anya's poetry find its way into Anya's novel? Which I think it did. As I said before, I think it's a really amazing book in that it is a poet's novel in both ways. It's really a piece of poetry and it's really a novel. It's not sort of, there's a really compelling story, but the story is told for me through poetry. And so I would say certainly Anya's poetry found its way in there. I hope it did, in that I felt comfortable with translating Anya's poetry, and I felt also comfortable in finding that poetry in the book.
Very good. Any other questions, dear participants? Before, I can always, yes? I thought I heard a voice. Maybe it was John. So yes. Now we are two disembodied voices, or one unvoiced presence. It's very interesting. So, Anne, you and Anja actually have been collaborating for a while, right? Or at least have been collaborating for a while. And Lisa, you mentioned that this was, although you had read Pilar's work, this was your first translation project.
Yeah.
What are some of the characteristics of starting to translate a work by an author from whom you have already translated other works? And likewise, Lisa, if you can comment a little bit on how does it feel to start afresh, if you will, this experience of translation? Which one would like to go with it?
Start fresh.
Start fresh.
To me, it's exciting. It was. I've translated. There's several authors who I've translated several books by, and obviously every book is always different. But I know the kind of linguistic tics and habits of some of the writers that I translate, and on one hand, that's comforting because I feel like I think Anne was talking earlier about some things where she was reading something and thinking, okay, I know what all of these words mean, but how is this actually functioning in a poetic sense, etc. And so it's a little easier to do that with somebody who you've translated multiple books by. And by the same token, it's very invigorating and refreshing to have, or at least in this case it was, to have a new project whereby you have to interrogate everything, right? And I whether it's your first or not book with someone, I love Carol Meyer, who was a translator and study scholar who once said to me many years ago, and I've never forgotten, she said, translation is the most intimate form of reading. And I completely agree, and I love that expression because I think it is very sensual, actually. And I think both ways are satisfactory, but it's like coming to a new lover. You learn all of the quirks, tics, and it's very exciting.
There's also this wonderful feeling of tentativeness at that very beginning, right? I mean, you are sort of entering this new world. Everything is fresh. And that tentativeness is actually a very positive, can be a very positive creative force in translation. And what has your experience been?
In some ways, I think a best of both worlds in some ways. I am trying to remember, and now it's coming back to me, the same tentative feeling in those first 20 pages, but also in a different way, because I felt, as I said before, I felt like I knew when I was getting it right. So I also felt like I knew when I was getting it wrong, when I knew how I wanted it to sound, but it wasn't there yet. But something I think was very important about the way I read this book and the way I translated this book is that I knew not only what I thought was important, but from working with Anya before, I think I was particularly attuned to things that I think may have been important to her, things that I should like pick my ears up for, repetitions or certain rhythms. Luckily, it was easy enough because I also thought those things were important, but that can, I think, be something about working with a new author where I've certainly had the experience where I think, okay, I'm going to write it this way, and then the author comes and says, no, I really meant this thing. And I don't think that between Anya and me, because we had worked together before, there were many of those occasions. I think there weren't many things that I thought I was going to do something different, and Anya said, no, you lost something that was important to me, because I had that sense.
Oh, this is very, very nice. Very good. Very good. So let me ask, Lisa, what did you want to make sure did not get lost in the translation of Pilar's work? What was the most important thing that you wanted to preserve as fully and richly as possible?
I think I might say something like the dignity of the main character. Damaris is probably one of the best people that you could think of in terms of her soul and her spirit and her intentions and her ways that she views the world. And I think those are kinds of things that can quite easily come off as simpleness. And I very much wanted to make sure that because, as Pilar was saying earlier, there's classism, there's racism in this book, and I wanted to make sure that Damaris was not lost in some sort of, was not just seen as some sort of other, right?
Okay. Yeah. And Pilar, what is one thing that you would say to a translator, or did say, or didn't say, but you hoped would not get lost of that book in the translation?
My main worry was language, because the language in La Perra, it's very simple. Yeah, it's not, the narrator is not an educated person from a city. Yeah, and I wanted that to be preserved, that it didn't have difficult words, that it had, like, it sounded a bit like a country person. Yeah. And I think Lisa realized that right away, and that when we spoke for the first time, that like I was, oh, good, this is good. She understood that in the book.
Super.
Yeah,
Wonderful.
I thought that was that, like, you really need to know Spanish to get that. So I felt worried that maybe, what if she doesn't get it? But she did right away.
She did. Fantastic. And what was the one thing you thought you could not lose in the translation?
I'm going to cheat and say two things. The first thing is rhythm, but I've already talked about that. I think other than that, I wanted to make sure that the reader's experience in English was similar to mine in the challenge that the book posed, I think. So much of the experience of reading the book, it requires attention, Images are really important, and I wanted to give those images without telling a story. I didn't want to try to explain the images in the same way that they're not explained in German, because the process of understanding why the images are there are the process of getting to know the character and understanding the story.
Yeah.
And all of my process of understanding, I didn't want to give that to the reader what I had gained through my process.
That's very well put. Very well put. I mean, because most often as translators, we fall in love with the language of the source text. And well, by language, we mean the entire system of it, the sounds and the images and the rhythms and syntax. And it is always a great concern of ours that can get lost or somehow deficiently translated, and obviously it hasn't, this time. Anja, what is the one thing that you do not want to be lost in translation?
Well, I thought there was a danger because of the poetic images. There's a lot of beauty in the book, but there's also the world which I write about is also very harsh, and also some situations and scenes are really rather tough. And I didn't want. I think my biggest worry would have been that it gets too soft or too, that this sort of poetic undertone sort of kills the story, which is not at all soft or written in order to present beauty, but in order to talk about a character who somehow doesn't have words for himself. So yeah, I really wanted to to keep the contrast. Like on the one hand, have a language which clearly has its own rhythm and sound, but on the other hand, to somehow keep the edges also within the topics that I crossed that I touched within the story. So yeah, I think Anne did quite well.
Super. And so we have one last question from the audience. What are the authors working on right now, and what are the translators are working on right now?
I started to work on a story which deals a lot with the new Silk Roads in China, and I got interrupted a bit because I was I wanted to do research this summer in some Western Balkan countries and in China, and so this is a little bit postponed, though I still work on the manuscript.
Yes, all the postponements we have had to live with. Yes, I hope you resume as soon as you can. Pilar, what is your current project?
I managed to finish the novel just now during this time with my kid at home, so I'm very proud about that.
Oh, fantastic. So you can take a little break. Oh, that's wonderful. Lisa and Anne?
I'm working.
Okay, Lisa.
All right. I'm working on a couple of things right now. One is a nonfiction book by an Argentinian writer named Graciela Mochkovsky, which is about a community of Peruvian Jews in the Andes, which is really fascinating. Another one is a novella, a short novel by a Chilean writer named Alejandra Costamagna, who I found out after I began is actually friends with Pilar. I did not know this in advance. And I'm getting ready to start a collection of Mexican science fiction short stories by Julia.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. Quite versatile and a range of texts. Anne?
Yes. I'm about to start translating a very short novel, which is make a nice change. I've had some very long projects recently, by a also an author who's no longer living, so that's another change from the most recent projects. Her name is Lubusha Monikova, actually a Czech author who wrote in German. Very much looking forward to that. But the book is called Verklärte Nacht, and the title will stay in German in its English translation, which is the first for me. I've been trying to find a book for the newest book by a major German author, Ingo Schulze, which is much more involved with recent German history, but shares some similarities with Anya in that it's a book that requires a lot of attention and is quite long. So I'm hoping to find a publisher for it.
Thank you so much to all of you. This was really a very joyful experience, and I'm so thankful for the time you have given and the patience with which you responded to our technical difficulties. But and I cannot tell you how I wish we were doing this in person, because now we would have just walked to Java House and picked up our coffee and maybe continued our conversation. But who knows? Maybe there will be another opportunity. We wish all four of you the very best with the National Book Award. And for us, you are both winners, even though there's only one. Okay, thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.